Hi, my name is Rayanne Porte and I'm glad you're here. In this video, I'm going to be talking all about fear. Specifically, I'll be talking about what fears I had when I was back in my food and fitness struggles, why those fears kept me stuck in my struggles, and most importantly, what the solution is and how I got unstuck. So thanks for joining me today. Let's dive in. So what I'm going to do is just list you all of the fears that I had back in my struggles. And I didn't really realize this until a little bit later, but it actually was a helpful exercise for me to just literally write down all of the fears that popped into my head. And it really made me realize how entrenched I was in fear, and I didn't even really realize it. So these are 24 fears that I had back then. Fear of certain foods, like certain foods that had fat, healthy fat, trans fat, all the things. Fear of gaining weight, fear of gaining others' approval, fear of not being able to work out due to injury or maybe being on vacation, fear of people's comments at events, fear of not being happy, fear of not being in control, fear of not being able to maintain weight I had lost, fear of going places if I had gained weight, fear of being around junk food, fear of times when I couldn't track my calories or my macros, fear of times when I was unable to work out, fear of my circumstances not being easy, fear of stress and stressful environments, fear of wearing a bathing suit, fear of something bad happening to me, fear of not being able to stop eating and never having self-control, fear of not being perfect, fear of my body not getting what it wants or needs, fear of expressing emotions, fear of overly expressing emotions, fear of life being too hard or it feeling like it's too much, fear of failure, and fear of change. Now, I do not list these fears to scare you or to depress you or to make this a Debbie Downer video. It actually was super powerful for me to name my fears. And so let me give you, before I go into the solution, I'm going to talk very briefly, just high level, how fear played out for me in my day-to-day in the reality of my food and fitness struggles. So 2 different scenarios. In certain times of my life, fear, I had a whole bunch of fears, and basically that led me to restrict my food. I thought that if I could just control my food, I could also control my weight, and that would lead to control and ease and happiness. Well, when that didn't pan out for me, fear on all those fears were still there. I said, well, restricting my food isn't the solution. So I just ended up going to food. So I ended up overindulging. And then I discovered that all my fears were still there. So then that led me just to wallow in shame. And then basically I didn't know what the solution was. So I just was led right back into all of those fears leading me to restrict my food. So I felt like it was this constant cycle I was in, and I wasn't ever addressing the underlying fears that were leading me to restrict my food and then leading me to overindulge in my food. In other times of my life, I never restricted my food, but my fears were more around my circumstances. And I instead just went straight to overindulging because I felt like food was my comfort. And then again, once I ate all the food and I found that my fears were still there, I was just left with all the shame, and it led me back into eating more and more and more just because I didn't know what the solution was. So again, I don't say all these things to depress you. For me, it was very powerful for me to figure out what was going on, what my fears were, and to actually name what was happening. It felt actually like a burden lifted off of me because I could actually muddle through all of the mess that was going on and put actual meaning to what was happening. So now I will talk about the solution. Okay, so now for the solution, which this is the hope of this video. I will give you 3 things that you can do today to help stop walking in this fear and start making progress in finding freedom from your food and fitness and body image struggles by knowing what to do with your fear. So here are the 3 things. First, know that it is completely normal to have fear. So I always think about this from a perspective of our brain. God created our brain. Well, there's a certain part of our brain, the amygdala back here, that houses our fight or flight response. So anytime that there is actually a physical threat, like a danger coming at us, our body, like that can be scary. If like a car pulls out in front of us or like a dog is running at us, in our body, God created it so amazing that our body instinctively knows what to do with that fear, and it chooses to fight, to flee, or to survive, basically. So this part of your brain is keeping us alive. So that's why it's completely normal to have these fears. And when the devil tells us his lies about food, fitness, and our bodies, it is completely normal for us to have these fears because we just had no idea. We had never been able to recognize the devil and his lies before, but now we can. So the first thing to do is not to deny having these fears, not to ignore them, not to shun them, but instead to shine a light on them. And then the second thing, so the first thing is to know that our fears are normal. The second thing that we can do with our fears is we get to choose what we do with it. So we can either choose to obey the fear or buy into the fear or root that fear deep down in us, or we can choose to give that fear to God and put our trust in Him instead. And we can choose not to obey that fear, but instead we can choose to tell that fear the truth. So, one thing I always think about when I think about that we have a choice is I think about all the times in the Bible when God has instructed us not to fear. It's not that He doesn't want us to shut down our fight or flight mechanism. He doesn't want us not to fear when fear is appropriate and when that fear actually keeps us alive because we know what to do to get out of a situation of physical danger. No, He says do not fear because He doesn't want the fears that are based on Satan's lies root deep down in us. And so we get to choose to live in both worlds, to know and accept that it's okay to hold this fear, but at the same time know that our faith is bigger and that God is bigger and that He, because of Jesus dying on the cross, who gained victory over sin and death and our fear, we can choose to say, oh, yup, I have this fear, but I know that my God is bigger, my faith is bigger, and I'm going to tell my fear the truth. And so that is the third thing. So the first thing was to know that our fears are normal. The second thing was to choose what we do with the fear. And the third thing is to know that God is bigger and to discover how to trust God despite having these fears. So how do we trust God? So for me, there's a couple things that I did in my journey that helped me trust God. One was to know that the solution to our food and fitness struggles was not to eat this and not that. For so long, I just wanted somebody to tell me what to eat and everything will be better. Just tell me what to eat because what I'm doing right now is not working and I need to figure out something right away, right now. Let's go. And so God had to have a heart to heart with me and say, Rayanne, you got to take a step back. It's an internal spiritual battle going on. It's not this external thing that you think can be solved by the Band-Aid approach of a diet. So you have to know that trusting me, building up intimacy with me is going to help you in your food and fitness struggles, but it's not going to be a eat this and not that approach. Secondly, I was moved by His love. His love, perfect love, casts out all fear. So the minute that we recognize that and that we go to God and we give Him our fears, we literally hand them over to Him. He tells us exactly what to do with them. So, and then the last thing is I had to tell my lower brain, or I'm sorry, my higher brain, which is where our prefrontal cortex houses all of our reasoning, all of our critical thinking, all of our in-depth thoughts. My higher brain had to tell my lower brain, which is this is the impulsive fight or flight part that like literally wants us to like always follow the fear, right? Because this is the part of the brain that wants to protect us. It's doing its job. It just doesn't know that we don't need to be protected from food and fitness struggles because they can't really harm us, right? So my higher brain had to tell my lower brain the truth. And this is the truth. We can trust God with our appearance, with our body, His provision, our circumstances, our past, and helping us forgive others and living separate from it. We can trust God with our purpose in life. We can trust God with being our fulfillment, our comfort, our peace. The truth is, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. We can trust God because He takes care of us. We are His children. Our worth is in Him. We know that the world is broken, but He has victory over all of it. When I trust God, I get to bear fruit, and self-control is one of them, and that will help me in my food and fitness struggle. Instead of shame, I get to focus on holy conviction from Him. God, you are with me. You give me peace. I am worth more than sparrows. God says He will fight for us. He is our stronghold, our refuge, our strength. He upholds us. He saves us. These are the truths that we get to ruminate on that make it such so that we can walk in our God being bigger than our fear. So what is the result? The result of giving our fears over to God and trusting Him with them is that we're going to see healing in our food and fitness struggles. More than that, we're going to see intimacy with Him. And third, we're going to be able to recognize when the devil tries to come in there with his lies, with egging us on to buy into fear and follow that fear. We're going to be able to recognize that right away and veto it right out of our brain. And lastly, our default thought pattern is going to be the truth. Once we ruminate on the truth, our default isn't going to be the fears that we've been repeating over and over to ourselves for so long. Our default thought pattern is going to be the truth. And when a blip of a thought comes in of a fear, we're going to be able to veto it out right away because we'll recognize it. So thank you so much for joining me today and watching this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you want to talk to me about your specific situation, always feel free that you can reach out to me, and I will see you right back here next week.